not only environment did not change and we've changed, but now, by virtue of us recognizing the finest in the environment, we begin to influence the environment from behind the scenes. We begin to project that what is now internal world, the internal richness, and assign that to the environment which to the mundane consciousness does not have. This is what Sri Aurobindo called divonization of matter. When we speak about these matters of manifestation and the reality, let's say, of what we experience on day-to-day basis, this world that we all inhabit right now, I don't know if that was always the case, right? We can only speculate, already filled with so many variables, like this world, this phenomenal reality, this reality that whatever attitude we may have towards it, whether this is real, whether this is a phenomena, whether it's something in between, certainly presents endless possibilities. And at the very same time, it also seems to be fixed in certain ways that nothing we can do about it. So we find ourselves in this world which has this movement of planets, seasons, right? We have this something which, well, once you kind of experience that, this life unfolds and follows its own kind of trajectory. And then we find ourselves in this life making sense out of that. So the important here reminder is that whatever we speak in terms of the potentiality, all of this already present here in this reality. This is why the world we live in is so diverse. Diversity is not lacking anything. This diversity literally is endless in terms of the way it expresses itself. Yes, there are issues. Yes, there are, let's say, certain emphasis on this, on that. How are we going to make it as a humanity? Are we making it? Who is behind the scenes? Who is driving the consciousness bus? Right? Are we all creating this doldrum together? Or just some people? Are all people? And some of them maybe not people? All these different kind of perspectives. And yet, here we are, all of us experiencing this reality, light through the retina for those of us blessed to have sense of sight. We breathe, we experience all this, what is available through the senses, these enjoyments. Yes, there is this also a psychological infuse thrown into the mix, which colors all our experiences. Very often, I give this example, is that it all depends on what state we are in that amounts and allows to experience what otherwise could be walking literally in a paradisical setting somewhere on the shore of the beautiful warm ocean, somewhere in a Tropic of Cancer where there is no winters, eternal summer, right? Coconut water freshly from the palm tree. And we can be as miserable as anything. And we can experience true sense of happiness and contentment growing up in a ghetto. These are important reminders. What is it all rooted then? How all this is truly influencing the way we experience reality. Is reality a given? Or is it reality perceived? What's the relationship between the perceiver and the perceived? Who is fixed here? Is the perceiver fixed and the perceived is a constant state of flux? Or what is perceived is fixed and the perceiver in a constant state of flux? What's the true picture here? After all, there are some objective reality, right, we can speak of. The objective reality, the trees that grow outside, can be measured. That one 80 years, that one 100, that one what have you, planted maybe 10 years ago. It grows, it follows its own, let's say, unfoldment in space-time. There is a rock here, rock there. How long this rock been around? It doesn't change depending on our moods and swings. What is constant here? These are important questions to get answers so as to have greater clarity with regard to what is actually going on. And all this in turn is rooted in the level of our consciousness. What all this? Perception. Ability to perceive is rooted and colored by how much consciousness is available. So this is very important understanding. This understanding, in a way, is like growing up yet again from the state of adolescence, where we constantly blame circumstances, constantly blame whatever colors our circumstances, because we have the ability to see that our perception is opened to that of how much light is available that illumines any experience we undergo, any without exception. For example, we can speak of so-called mundane level of consciousness which is not opened or not opened enough to the subtler dimension, and everything appears, what could be said, as it is. If it rains, and if you don't like that, well, it's miserable. If the sun shines, well, that's very good. It's fantastic. But for someone who doesn't like too much heat, well, that's already kind of unbearable. And so it goes. Someone likes pudding, someone hates sweets, someone likes this, dislikes that, and we call this, everyone have the taste of their own. But when it comes to these life situations, encounters, and what we experience, what is here the driving force? What is here behind the scenes gives us a sense how that what is actually available to everyone in equal measure experienced differently by each and every one of us. Just like an experiment, group of people will venture and have, let's say, similar experiences, and yet everyone would have something else to report. What is it based on? For us, important here is not the diversity in terms of diversity of psychological predispositions. In this context, in this manner of investigation and inquiry, it's important for us to see how our perception is colored depending on what level of consciousness we are established in. You see? So we can pay tribute now to some of the discourses by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when asked to give the distinction between, let's say, higher states of consciousness. How is reality perceived, or how perception works in higher states of consciousness. So we have the other day spoke about how the waking, dreaming, deep sleep constitute relative states of consciousness simply because they come and go. Therefore, they are referred to as relative. And then there is this transcendent. Transcendent here represents the reality. Transcendent doesn't go. The fourth, Turiya. And then that transcendent would need to be further evaluated. Is it homogeneous throughout with no differences? Well, apparently not so, because the feedback received over millennia shows us that there are gradations. So therefore the fifth one was added as Turyatita, that which is subtler, more refined than Turya. And then some traditions break that further down into the three respectively spoken of as, in English language, this would be cosmic, God, unity. What are these distinguished by? So the Turyatita here consists of the three states of consciousness, all of which are considered to be higher states of consciousness. Cosmic state of consciousness is characterized by witnessing. It's characterized by the ability to witness reality by virtue of separation from the self and the field of action. The ability to witness, stand as a witness by virtue of recognizing, realizing the self as standing opposite to the field of action. That field of action which is everything. In other words, the full gamut of all experiences. That's what cosmic state of consciousness is characterized. It's the state of many mystics, even some of the prophets. It's a lofty achievement already available to every human being. Cosmic state of consciousness is when we realize the self intimately, and yet that self stands separate from all phenomenal activity, from all what the self experiences. You see, that includes one's own body, one's own thoughts, one's own feelings, one's own sensations, obviously all interactions out there. So it is the high state of consciousness, but it is dual state of consciousness. There is a gap between the subject and the object, and that gap here is not the gap that separates one in the mundane state of consciousness, where that same subject-object dynamic at play. But in the mundane state of consciousness, subject is drowned in the objective sphere of experience, annihilated, absolved. You see the difference? The self lost in the phenomenal reality, the self lost in the objective sphere. Shiva lost himself in Nara. So therefore we can speak of cosmic state of consciousness as being radically different as opposed to the mundane state of affairs, because the self here reclaimed But it is not state of unity yet. This state is characterized by the gap. It is characterized by that gap between the self and other, the self and the world, the self and objective experience. Then something extraordinary begins to happen. By virtue of that state being not the ultimate state of affairs, when there is a propensity for beginning to recognize and reevaluate subtle aspects in the experiencing of the objects, one begins to bridge that gap. And the bridging of that gap is characterized by ability to reevaluate that what prior to that stood as separate from the self in terms of one's own self. So it's no longer that cold, detached witness, but it has the capacity to recognize oneself in particular, let's say, situations, circumstances. We could say now, we can use another language, it's the growth of compassion, empathy, devotion, and all these qualities that are associated with the heart-based qualities. This is the dawn of God consciousness. This God consciousness is characterized by the bridging of that gap between subject and object. So in other words, it's the ability to recognize finest in the gross. Reality did not change. Nothing changed in reality in itself. Nothing changed in that rock, in that tree, in that building, in that mountain, in that family, in that set of people, in this group of people. Everything and everyone still is experienced as objects of one's perception. But they no longer stand aloof, and one is able to recognize the finest in the gross. This is called refinement of perception. God consciousness is characterized by refinement of perception. It is also referred to as celestial perception, because the anatomy of that, the underlying esoteric dimension of that, is that by virtue of being drawn deeper and deeper into the domain of manifestation, when all these preceding phases of unfoldment are being withdrawn each into the preceding one reaches the templates. One reaches literally the source of where experience itself streams forth from. One recognizes and touches internally that where senses gain their providence. This is the state when all this so-called extraordinary, deeply internal experience occur. Visions, not visitations. We're talking about internal lights, internal sounds, internal sense of touch. Being able to perceive the fragrances that are not in the environment. They don't come from the lilac or rose. They are perceived within, deep within, where the templates of creation themselves contain all this incomplete fullness. In the Lynn McTaggart classic, The Field, the quantum physicists the neuroscientists have been stumbled an extraordinary discovery that nothing what is perceived through the cortexes, what we consider to be belonging to the range of sensory perception, due to the chemical substances that, let's say, rose imbued with, and every particular type of rose has unique, specific, there's a, creme de la creme of all the roses, Rosa Damascena, which is the most precious of all the roses in the kingdom of rose gardens. It goes into that essence of the rose, Rosa Damascena. It's not due to the particular alchemical composition, or the chemical composition, rather, of the rose itself. It's a process of recognition. The myriad, the billion and trillion and quadrillion range of these fragrances already exists in the memory reservoir of our consciousness at the level of the heart, where the cognition, the brain simply, very quickly as a computer, recognizes, like, just as the chat GTP forks out the answer within a split of a second on a very, very complex topic, because it simply algorithmically recognizes what already exists and structured in that supercomputer. Our brain is that supercomputer. It recognizes this quadrillion range of infinitely subtle sense and allocates that with that particular experience. You see, the yogis, adepts, and every one of you have that capacity to touch that experience in your meditation. You're no longer smelling through the nose. You no longer hear through the ears. You're no longer seeing through the eyes. You no longer perceive sense of touch through the hand, in being in contact with whatever surface that is. This is celestial perception. And the dawn of celestial perception, simply spoken of as God consciousness, translates in terms of the perceptual capacity in the ability to extract the finest in whatever environment is. We have said, ability to extract the finest in the gross. Nothing changed in the environment. We've changed. And with us, environment changed. Something extraordinary happens now. Not only environment did not change and we've changed, but now, by virtue of us recognizing the finest in the environment, we begin to influence the environment from behind the scenes. We begin to project that what is now internal world, the internal richness, and assign that to the environment which to the mundane consciousness does not have. This is what Sri Aurobindo called divonization of matter. It is the way I look at the world that the world becomes, not the other way around, that the world exists as a fixed reality, and I'm simply partaking that. That's at the lower level of consciousness. It doesn't stop there. This celestial perception, aka God consciousness, matures with time to that what is known as unity consciousness. Unity consciousness is characterized by the ability to recognize the infinite quality in the finite. See, if in the God consciousness there is an ability to recognize the finest in the gross, in unity consciousness is the ability to recognize the infinite in the finite. In the words of the poet, now, Remember the British poet? Right? Remember the words? Infinity in the hour, in the grain, in the blade of grass, in a grain of sand. To behold. I don't now remember this, but we can brush up our memory. It's beautiful lines. William Blake. In the blade of grass, in the grain of sand, to recognize that infinity in an hour. So this is unity consciousness. Unity consciousness is when the gap between subject and object is illumined by light of one's own awareness to such degree that the boundaries of object and the boundaries of subject are annihilated, absolved. So, technically speaking, subject and object dynamic, exemplified by that trinity, remains intact. But look what happens. The boundaries are here, illumined with so much light of one's own, that that gap no longer exists, or this gap ceases to exist, because this gap is no longer aloof, cold distance, characterized by cosmic state of consciousness, characterized by witnessing state of consciousness, but it is illumined by the light of one's own self, to such degree that subject and object literally experienced as one. So the unity state of consciousness is when subject swallows the object, and likewise object swallows the subject. And this is worthy to bring a reminder of the great saint poet Kabir, who exclaimed, "Everyone knows that drop merges with the ocean, but only few know that ocean also merges with the drop." This is the conformation of a state of unity. This is the exclamation through the words of a poet. So these higher states of consciousness, characterized and defined in whatever terms available in the language to give this, whatever foretaste, what all and each and every one of you have touched at some point, because that's the reality of the situation. Of course, it is a very different affair between touching these higher states of consciousness and being established in them. But the importance of the fact that all of you have touched this is a reconfirmation, and should act and should serve as reaffirmation and encouragement that these are not unreachable somehow states of consciousness to a human being. Somehow one may read about them, one may hear about them, but they're beyond my reach, beyond the reach of my capacity. No. All of us experience this. It's just so subtle, it goes unnoticed. It's so refined, it goes unnoticed. It's just when everything is fine, we forget about the body. When we're happy, when everything is beautiful, we forget about what otherwise, this, that. We take it for granted. These are the moments when we touch this. So therefore, even the unity state of consciousness is experienced, even for a very short periods of time, because that's in the nature of experiencing. And of course, some of us are more attentive. Some of us, let's say, by virtue of certain, let's say, inborn predispositions, certain, let's say, abilities that were honed by being given to certain professions which requires that honing in the first place, where that dynamic, that dance between subject and object is required for the acquisition of certain skills. We know that how we fall into that, what is known also as flow states. How when something takes over and it has energy of its own, momentum of its own, we are completely withdrawn. We are taken for the ride in the creative process, in the process of certain unfoldment. But that does not mean that some of us are completely exempt. None of us are exempt. All of us are open to these possibilities because these are inborn rights. We are literally born with this capacity. In many cases, we are born in these states of consciousness as children, as newborn babies, until, let's say, something else takes over, until the compromise of growing up conceals that, and the mundane consciousness sets in. So this is the necessity for spiritual work. So it's, if one does not enjoy that, because there are people who do enjoy, people who come into this world and without spiritual practices, even growing up, remain in cosmic, at least, state of consciousness. It's like taken for granted for them. Very little is required, just a tap on the shoulder, just a little push, little encouragement, a bit of some practice, and there we are. It's unstoppable, because the forces of evolution are unstoppable.